Imagine 500 people crammed inside stone walls with no plumbing, no sewers, no toilet paper. Sounds like a death sentence, right? Here's what's bizarre. Castle residents got sick less often than you do today. What did medieval builders know that we've completely forgotten? Ever heard of a garderobe? No, it's not some fancy French wardrobe. It's medieval speak for toilet. And trust me, these weren't your average bathroom facilities. Medieval kings literally had their toilet seats carved right into castle walls. These small stone rooms jutted out from the castle like tiny boxes hanging in midair, supported by stone corbels. The toilet hole dropped straight down 60 feet or more into moats, rivers, or cesspits below. Gravity was their entire sewage system. But here's where it gets weird. People actually hung their clothes in these toilet rooms. The name garderobe literally meant wardrobe because the ammonia from urine killed lice and fleas in fabric better than any medieval dry cleaner ever could. Talk about multitasking. The downside? Cold wind constantly blew up through that toilet hole. Winter bathroom trips weren't just uncomfortable, they were genuinely dangerous. Frostbite in sensitive areas was a real concern for medieval royalty. Makes you appreciate modern heating, right? Then there's the security issue nobody talks about. Those waste chutes became accidental invasion routes. Attackers occasionally tried climbing up through the garderobe shafts to infiltrate castles. Imagine being a guard and having to defend against enemies literally climbing up through the toilet system. The Tower of London had garderobes emptying directly into the Thames. Twice daily, the tides conveniently flushed everything downstream. Natural sewage treatment at its finest, though downstream neighbors probably had different opinions about this arrangement. Well, garderobes solved the immediate problem of where waste went, but what happened when those cesspits filled up? That's where some truly fascinating medieval professionals entered the picture. Who were these brave souls willing to dive headfirst into medieval sewage? Meet the gong farmers. And yes, that's their actual job title. Gong was medieval slang for dung, which tells you everything about their career prospects. These weren't your average castle workers. Gong farmers earned roughly 6 times what regular laborers made. Why? And we'll imagine your worst Monday at work, then multiply it by 1,000 gallons of human waste. Makes sense, right? But here's the kicker. They could only work at night. The law literally said 9 p.m. to 5 a.m. No exceptions. It wasn't because they were vampires or preferred the nightlife. Medieval people didn't want to see, hear, or smell what was happening to their waste. Out of sight, out of mind, right into the cesspit. The danger was real too. In 1326, a gong farmer named Richard the Raker, and you can't make up that surname, actually drowned after falling through rotted wooden boards into a cesspit. Talk about a workplace hazard your insurance company doesn't want to hear about. Castle cesspits were engineering marvels in their own disgusting way. These stone-lined underground chambers could hold thousands of gallons and were strategically positioned downhill from living quarters. Smart medieval architects knew gravity was their friend, and nobody wanted uphill sewage. Then there's the weird part. Nothing went to waste. The collected mess became a thriving business. Tanners bought it for leather processing, and farmers lined up for premium fertilizer. Medieval recycling at its finest, creating an economy where even your bathroom habits had market value. But cleaning these massive pits was just one piece of the hygiene puzzle. The real genius lay in how castles managed to avoid smelling like giant toilets 24/7. Now here's the brilliant part that'll shock you. Medieval castles didn't constantly smell like giant toilets. These builders were way smarter than we give them credit for. Castle architects positioned garderobes on whichever side faced the prevailing winds. Basic physics, right? Let the wind blow your problems away from where you sleep and eat. They weren't just randomly sticking toilet holes in walls. This was calculated engineering, but the real genius was in the floors. Fresh rushes mixed with lavender, mint, and meadowsweet covered everything like medieval carpet. These weren't just thrown down once and forgotten. Servants replaced them weekly, creating a natural air freshener system that actually worked. Then there's the angle trick that most people never hear about. Smart designers angled those garderobe chutes away from the castle walls at the bottom. Why? So waste fell clear of the stonework instead of creating disgusting brown streaks down the side of your expensive castle. Nobody wants their fortress looking like a giant bird dropped something on it. Lime became their secret weapon. They threw it down chutes and into cesspits regularly, not because they understood bacteria, but because it worked, killed odors, broke down waste, and accidentally prevented disease. Sometimes being practical beats being scientific. The Great Hall, where all the important stuff happened, was always located as far as possible from any garderobe. We're talking entire courtyards separating dinner from the toilet. Medieval party planning at its finest. And here's something that sounds fancy but makes perfect sense. Nobles carried pomanders. These were metal balls stuffed with spices and herbs. Hold one to your nose when walking past questionable areas, and suddenly you're smelling cinnamon instead of, well, you get it, but all this waste management was nothing compared to feeding hundreds of people daily without killing them. While nobles worried about where their waste went, they had an even bigger problem on their hands. Feeding hundreds of people daily without killing them from food poisoning. Castle kitchens operated like military units, and honestly, they needed that level of organization to avoid disaster. A large castle kitchen prepared over 1,000 meals every single day using a staff of 30 workers. Each person had one specific job, and stepping outside your role could get you fired faster than a kitchen fire could spread to the Great Hall. Speaking of fires, kitchens were built in separate buildings or behind massive stone walls. Smart castle designers learned this lesson the hard way after watching entire fortresses burn down because someone left the roast unattended. The kitchen floors weren't flat like modern ones. They sloped toward drains so blood, fat, and food scraps could be washed away multiple times daily. Castle servants hauled bucket after bucket of water to flush everything downhill because letting organic matter sit around was basically inviting death to dinner. Then there's the spit boy. Poor kid had the absolute worst job in the castle. He sat for hours turning meat over roaring flames in temperatures exceeding 120 degrees. Makes your worst summer job look like a vacation, right? But here's what's really interesting. Those fancy food tasters everyone thinks were checking for poison? Well, they were actually more worried about spoiled meat. Rotten food killed way more nobles than assassins ever managed to. The head cook earned serious respect because keeping hundreds of people alive daily was genuinely impressive. One batch of bad pork could wipe out half the castle's population, but even perfectly cooked food presented another massive challenge once dinner ended. Here's the thing about medieval food storage. They were basically running a restaurant for hundreds of people without a single refrigerator. Talk about a logistical nightmare. Underground cellars became their secret weapon. These weren't just random holes in the ground. Castle builders dug deep into hillsides where temperatures naturally stayed around 55 degrees year-round. Cool enough to keep wine from turning into vinegar and cheese from becoming a science experiment. Some of these cellars could store preserved meats for months without spoilage. But here's where it gets interesting. The really wealthy castles had ice houses, basically medieval freezers that would make your energy bill look reasonable. Workers packed winter ice into deep pits, covered it with straw, and amazingly, some kept ice frozen until August. Imagine explaining that to your modern friends who complain when their ice maker breaks. Then there's the brutal reality of fresh meat. No refrigeration meant animals lived in castle courtyards until dinner time. A cow grazing outside your window one day became tomorrow's roast. Fresh meat couldn't safely last more than 2 days, so daily slaughter was routine. Grain storage required serious engineering. Raised stone. Buildings with ventilation slots prevented moisture buildup. Why? Because wet grain grew deadly mold that caused ergotism. Basically, medieval food poisoning that could kill you. The castle pantler inspected bread daily, cutting away green mold, but discarding anything with black mold. And get this, castles maintained fish ponds called stew ponds right on the grounds. Fresh fish stayed alive until cooking time. No freezer burn, no questionable expiration dates. Makes you appreciate your kitchen differently, right? But speaking of kitchens, medieval people had an even bigger invisible problem lurking in every glass of water. You'd think clean water would be obvious, right? Well, medieval castle builders actually understood this better than most people realize. They deliberately dug wells upstream and uphill from those cesspits we just talked about. Smart move considering gravity tends to make things flow downhill. But here's the kicker. Your average medieval person barely drank water at all. They preferred weak ale or wine instead. Not because they were secretly brilliant epidemiologists who understood contamination. Nope. They just thought water tasted boring compared to fermented beverages. Talk about accidentally stumbling into good health decisions. Castle wells were engineering marvels that would make your local plumber weep. Some went down 150 feet deep, requiring servants to haul buckets up by hand. Windsor Castle's well took 2 entire years to dig through solid chalk rock. That's dedication to hydration right there. The really clever castles collected rainwater in stone cisterns. This was considered the Mercedes-Benz of medieval water, pure, clean, and reserved for cooking and the Lord's household. Meanwhile, everyone else got whatever came up from the well, hoping yesterday's chamber pot didn't leak into the groundwater. Then there's the siege problem nobody talks about. Some castles fell not because enemies broke down the gates, but because their wells ran dry or got contaminated. Picture this. Your enemy tosses a dead horse over your wall into your water supply. Game over faster than you can say dysentery. Medieval folks used donkey-powered winches for the deepest wells because hauling water by hand would have killed the servants before the enemy arrived. But water wasn't their only invisible health threat. Sleeping arrangements presented dangers they never saw coming. The average noble slept on a mattress that cost more than most people's houses. We're talking about beds stuffed with goose down and swan feathers, enclosed in wooden frames carved by master craftsmen. But here's the kicker, even the richest kings still woke up scratching. Those fancy bed curtains weren't just for show either. They were medieval central heating. Castle bedrooms in winter could drop below freezing, and those heavy curtains trapped whatever body heat you could generate. Think of it as sleeping inside a fabric tent, within a stone icebox. But the real enemy wasn't the cold. It was the wildlife living in your mattress. Bed bugs, fleas, lice, and mites turned every night into a battlefield. Medieval people fought back with surprising ingenuity. They dragged those expensive mattresses outside regularly, beating them with wooden sticks like they were assaulting a piñata. Then came the secret weapon, direct sunlight. Those UV rays fried insects better than any medieval pest control spray. The washing routine was equally brutal. Bedding got scrubbed with lye soap made from wood ash, harsh enough to kill parasites, but gentle enough not to destroy the linen. Well, most of the time. And here's something that'll surprise you. Sleeping alone was considered weird. Even kings had attendants nearby. Sharing body heat wasn't romantic, it was survival. 2 people in a bed meant twice the warmth and half the chance of freezing to death. Servants? They got straw pallets that were basically medieval disposable beds. When the straw became too infested or disgusting, they'd burn the whole thing and start fresh. But pest control went way beyond just beds. The entire castle was locked in an endless war against creatures you definitely didn't want as roommates. Contrary to what Hollywood wants you to believe, medieval nobles didn't spend years marinating in their own filth. Edward III actually had a bathhouse at Westminster Palace with hot and cold running water. Talk about living like a king. The guy had better plumbing than most college dorms today. But here's where it gets interesting. Those massive wooden tubs weren't just filled with water and hope. Servants lined them with linen cloth to prevent splinters from turning bath time into a medieval torture session. Then came the real workout, hauling hundreds of gallons of heated water up stone staircases. Makes you appreciate your water heater, doesn't it? The weird part is that bathing was actually a social event. Nobles would sit together in these huge tubs, conducting business meetings while soaking. Imagine trying to negotiate a land deal while you're both naked in a wooden barrel. Medieval networking at its finest. They weren't using Irish Spring either. Castle soap came from animal fat mixed with wood ash lye, then scented with whatever herbs they could find. Castile soap from Spain was the Rolls-Royce of medieval hygiene. Nobles would literally fight wars over trade routes just to smell like lavender instead of pig fat. Then there's the dirty secret about public bathhouses. Towns had them everywhere, but they eventually got shut down because they became associated with prostitution and plague outbreaks. Apparently, communal bathing had some unintended side effects. Full baths were saved for special occasions because of all that preparation time. Weekly sponge baths with basins were more realistic. But here's what nobody tells you about medieval cleanliness. Keeping clothes clean was actually harder than keeping bodies clean. Castle laundresses had hands that looked like they'd been dipped in acid. That wasn't poetic exaggeration. The lye soap they made from wood ash was literally caustic enough to eat through skin. These women worked harder than construction workers, and their arms showed it. The process started with collecting everyone's dirty clothes. A single noble could generate 20 pounds of laundry weekly. That's like washing a medium-sized dog every 7 days, except this dog was covered in medieval sweat, food stains, and things we won't discuss at dinner. But here's where it gets fascinating. They used aged human urine as their premium stain remover. Servants collected pee in barrels and let it sit for weeks until the ammonia concentration could strip paint off walls. This wasn't desperation. This was chemistry before chemistry existed. The ammonia broke down proteins and oils better than anything else available. The actual washing involved beating clothes against rocks with wooden paddles. Imagine trying to tenderize a steak, except the steak cost more than most people's annual salary. Delicate fabrics rarely survived more than a few months of this treatment. Then came the brilliant part. White linens were spread across grass fields and left in direct sunlight for hours. Medieval people accidentally discovered that UV rays naturally bleached fabric, something we didn't scientifically understand until the 19th century. A typical castle employed 6 to 10 laundresses working constantly. They'd set up operations near rivers or large water sources because hauling hundreds of gallons of water wasn't practical. Their hands stayed permanently red and cracked from constant lye exposure. Well, speaking of constant maintenance, keeping clothes clean was nothing compared to the never-ending battle against the castle's real enemy. These tiny invaders made laundry day look like a vacation. Castle cats weren't cuddly pets lounging by fireplaces. They were professional pest control officers with serious job descriptions. A skilled mouser was valuable enough to appear in medieval wills and legal documents right alongside gold coins and family heirlooms. These working cats earned their keep by catching the endless stream of rats that threatened grain stores and spread disease. But cats couldn't handle everything alone. Castle floors were deliberately scattered with wormwood and fleabane, plants that naturally repelled insects. Smart, right? Medieval people might not have understood chemistry, but they figured out which herbs made bugs run for their lives. Then there were the rat catchers, medieval pest control specialists who used ferrets like furry missiles. They'd send these quick little hunters into wall cavities and underground tunnels while terrier dogs waited at the exits. Picture a medieval SWAT team, except furrier and probably smellier. Flies presented their own nightmare in castles. Kitchens, honey-coated cloth strips hung everywhere, and records show some traps caught thousands of flies weekly. That's not pest control. That's basically aerial warfare against tiny invaders. The clever part? Bed frames were built with tall legs and placed in shallow dishes filled with water. Crawling insects couldn't swim their way up to bite sleeping nobles. Medieval people essentially created moats around their beds. Well, mostly clever. One popular remedy involves smearing bedroom walls with fox grease to repel bedbugs. The smell supposedly drove them away, though it probably drove away humans too. Sometimes the cure was worse than the problem, but even the best pest control couldn't prevent every health disaster. When disease outbreaks struck, those same protective castle walls became death traps. Medieval nobles had surprisingly sophisticated dental routines that would make your modern dentist nod in approval. They crushed sage leaves with salt and ground cuttlefish bone to create an abrasive powder that actually worked. The sage killed bacteria, salt scrubbed away plaque, and cuttlefish bone provided gentle polishing action. But here's where it gets interesting. Your local barber wasn't just trimming hair. These guys pulled teeth, performed surgery, and cut hair all in the same bloody afternoon. The red and white striped barber pole? That originally meant blood and bandages, not patriotic decoration. Talk about a full-service establishment. Hair washing involved wood ash mixed with water, creating an alkaline solution that stripped oils and dirt. Then came the vinegar rinse, which unknowingly restored proper pH balance to both hair and scalp. Medieval chemistry by accident, really. Well, the beauty standards get darker. Noble ladies removed body hair using quicklime-based depilatory creams that frequently caused chemical burns. Vanity literally left scars back then. Makes your modern razor nicks seem pretty minor, doesn't it? Bad breath wasn't tolerated in polite society. People chewed fennel seeds, parsley, and cloves, all containing genuine antibacterial compounds that modern science confirms actually work. Medieval breath mints, essentially. Fingernail trimming required small knives, and etiquette books seriously warned against nail biting at dinner. Apparently, some social faux pas are timeless. Then there's the contradiction that defines medieval life. They understood enough about hygiene to create effective dental powder and antibacterial mouth fresheners, yet they applied caustic chemicals directly to their skin. Smart and dangerous simultaneously. But personal hygiene was just the beginning of staying healthy in castle life. When disease actually struck these massive stone fortresses, all the sage powder and fennel seeds in the world couldn't save entire populations from being wiped out. Disease outbreaks in medieval castles were like playing Russian roulette with an entire community trapped in a stone box. When sickness struck, those protective walls that kept enemies out suddenly became prison bars keeping death in. Castle populations could disappear within weeks. The Black Death didn't just kill 1/3 of Europe randomly, it had help from castle design. Thick walls, narrow windows, and hundreds of people sharing close quarters created perfect conditions for disease to spread faster than gossip at a royal wedding. But here's where it gets interesting. Medieval castle owners actually invented quarantine before anyone understood germs existed. They refused entry to sick-looking travelers for 40 days. Quarantina literally means 40 in Italian. Smart move, even if they had no clue why it worked. The weird part is how they handled sick residents. Infected people got moved to isolated towers or outbuildings, creating medieval isolation wards. It wasn't exactly modern medicine, but accidentally effective social distancing 600 years before anyone heard of viruses. Medieval doctors blamed something called miasma, basically bad air, for spreading disease. Complete nonsense scientifically, but this wrong theory led to better ventilation and cleaner surroundings. Sometimes being wrong for the right reasons saves lives. The ultimate medieval pandemic strategy? Run away. Castle owners would flee to remote hunting lodges when disease hit their main residence. Can't blame them, really. Staying in a stone fortress during a plague outbreak was like remaining on a sinking ship because you liked your cabin. Medieval waste management worked remarkably well most of the time. But when disease struck, even the cleanest castle became a death trap, where survival often meant abandoning everything and starting over somewhere else entirely.